As the end of the Second World War was coming closer, the Allied powers made preparations for the inevitable stream of German prisoners of war that had to be housed. In total, 1,026 prisoners of war camps were established in Britain. They accommodated a bit over 400,000 German PoWs that were shipped there. Among these camps was Camp 198, also known as Island Farm. The camp was situated on the outskirts of Bridgend, South Wales. The majority of the camp had been demolished in 1993, but there is one cabin, Hut 9, that has been preserved. And it has been preserved for a pretty good reason. It is the last remaining building that stood central in one of the largest escape attempts by German PoWs during the Second World War. Island Farm was initially built for part of the 40,000 women employed by the Royal Ordnance Munitions Factory in Bridgend. Yet, due to the poor conditions in reality, the women preferred travel over staying there, and the camp remained empty until 1943. For a short while, it housed American troops participating in D-Day, but following the successful invasion of Europe, the Allied powers started planning around the hundreds of thousands Axis PoWs they would undoubtedly capture and have to house in the near future. And, well, that's how Island Farm became a designated PoW camp. The camp had the capacity for approximately 2,000 prisoners. Sources are a bit conflicting on the composition of the prisoners because although German soldiers were initially housed there, some sources state that by late 1944 the War Office decided it should house German officers instead. But the Island Farm website disputes this and states that German officers were only housed there from early 1946 onwards. In accordance with the Geneva Convention, the prisoners could not be put to work. But not working didn't deter the prisoners from digging, albeit not in sight of the guards, because right after arrival they already began hatching their escape plans. It wasn't like the Allied authorities didn't realize the officers would not plan an escape, though. Superintendent William May and the camp commandant, Lieutenant Colonel Darling, actually made plans early on to prevent such an escape attempt. They knew a fair bit about escapes. Darling had been captured during the First World War and managed to escape from a German PoW camp before safely returning to England via Holland. Considering his experience, he was naive. Together with May, he decided that in case of an escape, local police should observe a 3-mile perimeter around the area, checking all vehicles, peoples, and whatnot. There were several other escape attempts preceding the main one. Already in January 1945, Darling and May discovered a near-completed tunnel in Hut 16. A stove was put over it to hide its presence. Darling and May acted on a tip-off, but when they entered the hut initially it seemed empty. Only after moving the stove they found the near-finished tunnel, including prisoners digging in it underground. Talk about getting caught in the act. Hut 16 was a bit further inwards than the aforementioned Hut 9, and perhaps that's logical. One of the key consistencies among tales of PoW camp outbreaks is that soldiers often dug decoy tunnels to throw guards off the actual escape plan. Perhaps that's what happened here as well, since the inmates from Hut 16 had to dig their tunnel under another hut. In short, not really the most ideal location to start digging an escape tunnel. Aside from this tunnel, that same month, 2 other prisoners were caught attempting to escape. They ripped iron bars from the window frames and turned them into crude wire cutters. Merely cutting the perimeter fence, they escaped. Their freedom lasted for a short while, however, because they were soon arrested nearby. Now, for the final escape, German inmates again decided upon digging their way out of the camp. Hut 9 was chosen because it was closest to the perimeter fence. Fortunately for the PoWs, metal objects were standard components of Red Cross parcels. Tins, cans, and other containers could skillfully be fashioned into useful items. Probably using these utensils and their hands, the inmates in Hut 9 dug into the heavy clay soil. Although it is an estimation, because it was never conclusively proven how the inmates actually dug the tunnel. Another thing the Allied powers didn't find out until after the war was where they disposed of the leftover clay and dirt. Usually inmates would put small amounts of dirt and soil in their pockets and dispose of them during walks outside, but this time none of that appeared to have happened. It wasn't until the 1980s, over 35 years after the escape, when vandals kicked down a wall inside the camp, that a hollow space behind it appeared. Small clay balls spilled over the floor. It turned out the inmates built a fake extension to an L-shaped bend in their hut. They crafted a false air vent where they disposed their little clay balls in. The camp's commanders never figured out where the soil was disposed, and nobody would have if it wasn't for a bunch of youths breaking things inside the remains of the camp. According to a 2016 research paper on the matter, straight from the beginning, the German officers were highly organized. They worked as a team and had designated escape task duties such as tunnelers and lookouts. They used a system of light switches to warn if guards came close by. The escape tunnel from Hut 9 measured approximately 90 by 90 centimeters. It ended up 13 meters in length and just 1.5 meters underground, right underneath the perimeter fence. Once inside the tunnel, it was relatively easy to move until one had to climb out again. The prisoners actually used materials from huts to prevent cave-ins and even built ventilation pipes from milk tins, blowing in air with a hand-operated fan. As the photograph shows, the Germans used wood to support the tunnel. Aside from using wood from their hut, they stole oak benches from the canteen and even cut their beds' legs. They were rather crafty, to be fair. In order to conceal the digging noise, the prisoners sang German choral songs, and I've already touched upon their crafted utensils, although it was never conclusively proven if they indeed did use them to dig those holes. At any rate, 4 months after the first German officers entered the camp on the night of Saturday, March 10, 1945, the escape was set in motion. Sources vary whether 70 or 83 POWs escaped that night, but it is safe to say it was the largest prison break by German POWs during the Second World War. At around 10 p.m. that night, after the final roll call, officers went down to the hut and down into the tunnel at their assigned times. You see, the escapees divided themselves into groups, and each group had a map, a homemade compass, and food. The way the map was devised is fascinating in its own right. During the war, all road signs across Britain had been deliberately removed in order to prevent German spies from orienting themselves if they were parachuted into Britain. A POW officer, however, during his transport to Island Farm, noticed a map hanging on the wall of the train wagon. He traced it on the tail of a shirt. Using this as a blueprint to create multiple maps, it led to the Germans having surprisingly accurate maps during their escape. Hans Hartzheim was part of one of the first groups. He later relayed how they crept through the tunnel into the adjacent field and then stole an Austin 10 car. It belonged to the camp's doctor, Dr. Bernd Milne. The car didn't start and the noise polluted the quiet night. According to Hartzheim, guards from the camp walked up to figure out what the noise was about when they saw the 4 men in a barely illuminated car. Boldly, Hartzheim asked them to give him a hand with the vehicle, which they surprisingly did. Due to the darkness, the men appeared as just 4 silhouettes in the car, and unbeknownst to the guards, they were literally helping prisoners escape and start the car. It worked though, and the men drove off. After driving around and getting lost, the men had to abandon the car and continue on foot. It didn't last long, and the day after they were arrested near Castle Bromwich, about 110 miles, so 177 kilometers away from Island Farm. As for the rest of the escape, it continued uninterrupted for several hours. As mentioned, there were designated lookouts using lights to make sure escapees would not get discovered. The group that stole the car was a bit of an exception because after crawling out of the tunnel, most escapees made their way to a tall tree nearby, where they gathered. By 2:15 a.m., 65 men had escaped. The 67th POW to escape was Hermann Schallenberg, a Luftwaffe officer. According to his testimony, as he left the tunnel, he heard a shout from a guard, followed by a gunshot. Next thing he knew, guards were giving chase, during which one fell down the tunnel exit. Several POWs hiding in bushes nearby allegedly couldn't hold their laughter, leading to the first 11 POWs being arrested right away. Realizing just how many prisoners escaped, a manhunt ensued, which lasted for well over a week. The next 2 POWs to be arrested were SS officer Karl Ludwig and Heinz Herzler. They planned on hitching a truck ride to the docks, but no trucks passed the road they chose on the night of the escape. As such, hiding in bushes and hedges, they slowly made their way to the Bridgend railway station. According to testimony, as they were hiding in a hedge, a drunk man decided to relieve himself. Unbeknownst to him, there were 2 German escapees hiding in it. At any rate, the men reached the station and managed to climb into a goods wagon, and unbeknownst to the men, it traveled in the opposite direction. When they got off, they ended up in Lannoren, just 8 miles from Bridgend. Over there, they encountered a police constable who subsequently arrested them. Not too soon after the escape was first noticed, the entirety of Bridgend and its police force were informed dozens of German POWs escaped. Newspapers across the country reported the population about them, speaking of a manhunt at a scale never seen before. and oftentimes curious stories of men hiding in goods wagons or woods being arrested by locals made headlines. American and British forces tracked down the Germans, aided by civilians, home guards, police, and even teenagers who considered it quite the spectacle. By Friday, 5 p.m. the next week, 2 prisoners that traveled the furthest were brought into the local police station. They told police they traveled to Brina, climbed onto a goods train, arrived near Southampton. Their plan was to sail to France on a cargo ship, but climbing out of the wagon they were spotted and subsequently arrested. According to official reports, the escapees were not punished upon return. Yet a few weeks after the escape, British authorities transferred all 1,634 inmates to Camp 181 in Carburton, Wauxhall, Nottinghamshire. This transfer wasn't necessarily a punishment as far as I could find, but the new fate of Island Farm is yet another curious twist of this already strange story. From now on, Island Farm was renamed to Special Camp 11. It was the designated prison camp to receive German officers captured in the battle for France. Although Special Camp 11 opened in November 1945, its first special prisoners arrived in January the next year. Among these special prisoners were generals and field marshals awaiting their trial at Nuremberg. Some of them were close advisors of Hitler, such as Generalfeldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt, commander-in-chief of the German armies in the West. Another was Feldmarschall Erich von Manstein, who was dismissed by Hitler in 1944 but played a vital role on the Eastern Front. Generaloberst Heinrich von Wietinghoff, the supreme commander of the German army in Italy, involved, although not directly, in the rescue of Mussolini and most combat in Italy. In short, after the escape attempt, Island Farm became the designated prison camp for incredibly high-ranking Wehrmacht officers awaiting their trial at Nuremberg. Many of them spent several years there, and the camp was only closed in 1948 when the last prisoners were returned to Germany. And as mentioned, all that remains of its high-ranking inmates and one of the greatest POW escapes is Hut 9, where it all began. Thank you for watching this video. If there's a topic or event you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also really like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and want to support my work, consider checking me out on Patreon or becoming a channel member. For just $1 a month, you will already gain access to the exclusive Patreon series. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.